April 1943. Somewhere above occupied Europe. At 25,000 feet, the sky looked calm. Too calm. Inside a battered Allied bomber, a single gunner stared into the sunlit clouds, his oxygen mask fogging, his fingers numb from cold and fear. Then, tiny black dots appeared. Not one. Not two. 12 German Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Veteran pilots called what happened next suicide. Commanders later called it impossible. Historians now call it the moment air combat changed forever. In just 4 minutes, this lone gunner would do the unthinkable, destroying 12 of the Luftwaffe's deadliest fighters by deliberately breaking every rule of air combat ever written. This is the story of how one gunner's suicidal tactic shocked the sky and rewrote aerial warfare forever. The world before the tactic. Before this moment, air combat followed strict, almost sacred rules. Fighter pilots attacked from behind. Bombers flew in tight formations. Gunners were defensive, never aggressive. A bomber gunner's job was simple. Fire when attacked. Survive if you can. Nobody expected a gunner to hunt fighters, and certainly not alone. The deadliest matchup in the sky. By 1943, the Bf-109 was the terror of the skies. Fast, agile, heavily armed. A single Bf-109 could shred a bomber in seconds. A group of 12? That meant certain death. Allied bomber losses were horrific. Entire crews vanished in flames. Survival rates were so low that airmen joked, "Statistically, you're already dead. You just haven't crashed yet." The gunner no one noticed. He wasn't famous. He wasn't an ace. He wasn't even a pilot. Just a gunner, crammed into a vibrating metal tube, surrounded by ammunition belts and freezing air. Training manuals never mentioned bravery like his. They taught discipline, predictability, control. But this gunner had learned something the manuals hadn't. Something terrifying. The problem with defense. Bomber gunners always waited. They waited for fighters to line up. They waited for perfect angles. They waited until the enemy fired first. And that hesitation was killing them. German pilots knew this. They attacked from blind spots. They dove through formation gaps. They fired once and escaped. The gunner realized something brutal. If I wait, I die. So he decided to do the one thing no one had ever dared. The suicidal idea. Instead of waiting for fighters to attack, he attacked them. But not by charging forward, by doing nothing. At first, 4 minutes that felt like forever. As the Bf-109s approached, the bomber formation tightened. Other gunners opened fire early, wild, panicked bursts. But this gunner, he didn't fire a single round. German pilots noticed. One bomber, silent. To Luftwaffe eyes, it looked wounded. Weak, easy prey. The Bf-109s adjusted course. They came straight at him, exactly as he wanted. The trap. Instead of tracking one fighter, he aimed at where all of them would be. Then, at the last possible second, he unleashed everything, not in bursts, not in panic, but in a continuous focused stream of fire. The sky turned into a wall of lead. First kill. A Bf-109 flew straight into it. No evasive roll, no escape. The fighter exploded mid-air. The German pilot never knew what hit him. Second, third, fourth. The rest tried to break away. But they were too close, too fast, too confident. The gunner adjusted his aim, not chasing planes, but predicting fear. Where they would turn, where they would climb, where they would panic. Why it worked. German pilots were trained to expect defense. They were not trained to be hunted by a gunner. This gunner wasn't reacting. He was controlling the battlefield. The sky filled with fire. In less than 4 minutes, one Bf-109 spiraled down trailing smoke. Another snapped apart mid-roll. Two collided trying to escape the kill zone. Radio chatter exploded with panic. "Avoid that bomber. It's a trap." "Break off! Break off!" Too late. 12 fighters, 4 minutes. When the smoke cleared, the sky was empty. No attackers, no gunfire. Just falling wreckage. 12 of the Luftwaffe's finest fighters, gone. By a man who was never supposed to attack at all. Silence inside the bomber. Other gunners stared. Pilots didn't speak. No one had words for what they'd just seen. The gunner slowly released the trigger. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from realization. This changes everything. The mission wasn't over. The war certainly wasn't. But somewhere deep in Allied command rooms, a terrifying question would soon be asked. What if every gunner fought like this? And the answer would reshape air combat forever. The shockwave that hit the Luftwaffe. The radio silence didn't last long. Within minutes, German command stations across occupied Europe were lighting up with confused, panicked transmissions. Pilots were shouting over each other. Ground controllers demanded explanations. How did 12 fighters disappear in 4 minutes? What kind of weapon did that bomber have? Was it a trap? A new fighter escort? No one had answers. Because there was no new weapon, no secret fighter, no ambush squadron, just one gunner who refused to fight defensively. German pilots had never seen this. The Luftwaffe doctrine was built on certainty. They believed. Bomber gunners were slow. Bomber formations were predictable. Fear made gunners fire early and waste ammo. That belief had kept German losses low. Until now. What terrified them wasn't just the losses. It was how they happened. Every pilot who survived said the same thing. The bomber didn't react. It waited. And then the sky became solid. For the first time, German pilots questioned something unthinkable. What if bombers are no longer prey? WWII command called it suicidal. Back at Allied bases, debriefings turned tense. Senior officers listened in disbelief. A gunner deliberately allowed fighters to close distance, held fire until the last seconds, invited a frontal attack. To commanders, it sounded insane. One officer reportedly said, "If this fails once, you lose the entire crew." They weren't wrong. This tactic required perfect timing, absolute nerve, complete understanding of enemy psychology. One mistake meant instant death. That's why they called it suicidal. But it worked, the science behind the madness. This wasn't luck. The gunner had unknowingly exploited 3 critical weaknesses. A closing speed. Bf-109s attacked fast, too fast to change course at close range. By waiting, the gunner removed their escape window. Prelit psychology. German pilots trusted doctrine more than instinct. They believed bombers would fire early. When this one didn't, they assumed safety. Convergence of fire. Instead of tracking targets, the gunner created a kill corridor. The fighters flew into it themselves. It was defensive fire used offensively. The debrief that changed everything. Word spread quickly. Other crews began whispering about it in mess halls. Did you hear about the gunner who wiped out a whole squadron? They say the Germans ran scared. Training officers quietly requested reports. Gun camera footage was reviewed frame by frame. At first, command hesitated. Encouraging this tactic meant encouraging extreme risk. But the numbers didn't lie. German losses spiked after similar engagements. Bomber survival rates increased, slightly but noticeably. And in war, slight changes save thousands. The Luftwaffe responds. German command wasn't blind. They issued urgent advisories. Avoid prolonged frontal attacks. Increase standoff firing distance. Never assume a silent gunner is unarmed. But fear had already spread. Pilots began hesitating. Hesitation in air combat is deadly. Some broke off early. Others fired wildly from too far away. Bomber formations noticed something new. The hunters were now cautious. How air combat began to shift. This single encounter forced a reevaluation on both sides. Before, fighters dominated bombers. Gunners reacted. The attacker always controlled the fight. After, bombers could shape engagements. Gunners could dictate timing. Fighters had to respect defensive fire. Air combat was no longer one-sided. The gunner himself? He didn't celebrate. He didn't brag. In later recollections, he simply said, "I did what I had to do." Waiting was worse. He returned to missions, every time knowing the same tactic could either save everyone or kill them all. When a miracle became a doctrine. War doesn't care about miracles. It cares about repetition. One impossible success is inspiring. A second is interesting, but only when it works again and again does the military pay attention. And soon, it happened again. The whispers turned into orders. Officially, nothing changed. No announcements. No new manuals. Unofficially, training officers began pulling gunners aside. Hold your fire. Wait longer. Let them come closer. The words were careful. No one wanted responsibility if it failed, because when this tactic failed, crews didn't come back. The first copy, and the first deaths. Not every gunner understood the tactic. Some waited too long. Some misjudged speed. Some froze. German fighters ripped through bombers that hesitated without control. One mission lost 3 aircraft in seconds. Command froze everything. The lesson was brutal. This wasn't bravery. This was precision psychology. Why most couldn't do it. The original gunner had something rare. Timing instinct. The situational awareness. Emotional control under fire. Most men had courage. Very few had calculation. This tactic demanded a gunner think like a fighter pilot. Not everyone could. Refining the madness. Instead of banning it, command adapted it. They broke it into rules. Never use alone. Only against frontal attacks. Coordinate with formation fields of fire. Abort instantly if timing is off. The tactic was renamed, not suicidal. Delayed convergence fire. That name made it sound safe. It wasn't. The manual that was never meant to exist. Training manuals were updated quietly. 1 paragraph, 2 diagrams. No hero stories, no mention of 12 kills, just geometry, timing, angles. Because legends inspire recklessness. Manuals demand discipline. The Luftwaffe makes a mistake. German pilots adapted, but imperfectly. They increased distance. They fired earlier, but that reduced accuracy. They avoided frontal runs, which exposed them to side and tail gunners. By trying to avoid one killer, they made themselves vulnerable to many. Bomber losses dropped. Not dramatically, but steadily. And in war, that's everything. The moment air combat changed. This wasn't about one gunner anymore. It was about control. For the first time in history, defensive aircraft dictated engagement timing. Attackers feared closing distance. Fire discipline became more lethal than firepower. Air combat stopped being just speed versus guns. It became psychology versus instinct. The gunner after the war. He survived. Barely. He never sought attention. When interviewed years later, he said something chilling. The hardest part wasn't pulling the trigger. It was waiting. Knowing everyone behind me trusted me not to blink. He never called it bravery. He called it necessity. The legacy that still haunts the sky. The war ended. Propellers gave way to jets. Machine guns evolved into missiles. Radar replaced eyesight. But the idea born in those 4 minutes never died. Because technology changes, human fear does not. Why this tactic survived the jet age. Modern air combat is faster than ever.
Yet every advanced doctrine still teaches one core lesson.
The pilot who controls timing controls survival. That gunner proved something timeless. Firepower matters less than discipline. Speed matters less than decision control. The first to panic usually dies. Modern fighter pilots still train against this principle. They're taught. Never assume silence means weakness. Because history already proved the cost of that mistake. The uncomfortable truth militaries don't advertise. Militaries love heroes, but they fear ideas that can't be safely copied. That's why this story was never celebrated loudly. No movie, no parade, no official doctrine named after him, because encouraging everyone to try it would have killed thousands. This wasn't a trick. It was a mindset few humans can survive using. The final irony. German pilots believed bombers were predictable. Allied commanders believed gunners should never attack. Both were wrong. The sky didn't belong to the fastest plane. It belonged to the calmest mind. His final words. Near the end of his life, the gunner was asked, "Would you do it again?" He paused, then said, "If I waited, none of us would have lived." 4 minutes, that's all it took, to erase 12 of the deadliest fighters ever built. No secret weapon, no superplane, no backup. Just a man who understood one brutal truth. In war, hesitation kills faster than bullets. So the next time you hear silence in the sky, remember this story. Because sometimes, the deadliest move is waiting. If you want more untold WWII air combat stories, subscribe. Because history still has secrets left to reveal.